Everyone knew that I was Charlie's best friend. They knew that he was arrested, and not one person asked me if I was okay. Learning that he was harming patients right in front of me and I didn't see it, I really carried that guilt for years. I started to really question myself, like, do I actually have any interior instincts? Do I actually have instincts? It took a long time, a lot of therapy. So many of us suffered dramatically with our mental health. The only way forward right now is through. We are much stronger than we give each other credit.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have Amy Loughren. She is the woman behind the story of The Good Nurse. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited to learn more about you, your story, what you're up to today, and future goals, what others can learn from you. You have such an interesting story, especially as being a nurse and the healthcare system. I'm really just excited to learn who you are and, yeah.
Thank you for inviting me, Amanda. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, Amy, tell us, the listeners, a little bit about who you are, and we can start there. I know that there's so much here, and my goal for today is to find out for our listeners who you are, your story, and what you're doing now.
Well, I have been a nurse since 1988, but I have actually been in the healthcare system as a healthcare provider since 1985. So we're coming up, it has been 40 years of working in this healthcare system. And most of my time was spent as an ICU open heart and trauma nurse, mostly a trauma nurse. And I famously, in 2003, befriended unknowingly a serial killer. He was my best friend at work. And after a little over a year of us working together and really being a team, he was fired and found out that he was murdering patients. He was not only murdering patients at the hospital where I was working, but he had been working over 16 years in 9 different institutions murdering patients.
Wow.
And 5 of those hospitals knew at least that he was harming patients. They all suspected he was murdering patients, and they sent him to the next hospital. So when he got to my hospital, it was also very well known by the hospital months before they fired him that he was actually harming patients. And the hospital itself started to keep that evidence away from detectives and away from the investigation. So I worked undercover with the New Jersey prosecution to not only get the evidence that we needed, but also to wear a wire and eventually get a confession of the most prolific serial killer in history. He murdered between 400 and 1,000 people, and we think that's a low number.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, when he came to the hospital, were you working undercover at that time, or what drew you to him initially when you were building that fo
So, what drew me to him was, and no, I did not know anything about him at all.
Mm.
We became fast friends. We were teammates. He was my work husband.
Yeah, yeah.
And we even changed our schedules to be able to work together. I was most often the code leader. So we were coding a lot of patients. A lot of patients were dying on our floor. And I never suspected him. I did not see anything out of the ordinary. There is one famous story that I have spoken about, and that is when I actually did walk in on him murdering a patient.
Mm.
And during that particular incident, I remember questioning, why is he injecting this person who is coding with this particular medication? And I remember just sort of tilting my head and thinking, why is he using that particular medication? But I trusted him so much. I trusted him implicitly.
Mhm.
So I never really questioned him. And I actually took responsibility for that particular code and that medication that he gave. And he approached me after that and he said, "Do not ever cover for me ever."
Wow.
So he did have something in him that cared about me enough that he didn't want me hurt. He
Right,
did not want to see me get in trouble.
right, right.
So there was something there. But no, I worked with him the entire time without knowing until he was fired from his job. And then the detectives came to me, and the lead detective showed me some evidence that I could not ignore. And it was completely obvious that he had been withdrawing medications that could only be used for sinister reasons. There was no other explanation except that he was harming patients.
I'm curious, what was happening inside of you emotionally, as that awareness starting to build, right? You noticed that he was using a medication, you trusted him, covered for him, to come to find out that there was there was investigations happening. I'm so curious what that may have been like for you emotionally.
I always think that I've been healed, but even talking about it now, I start to get emotional. But learning that he was harming patients right in front of me and I didn't see it, I really carried that guilt for years, for many years. And it still comes up as how horrible I feel for these families and that there's no possible way that I could apologize to them enough and that I didn't see it. But I was going through so much. I was really, really struggling with my mental health at that time. I had a history of suicidality. I also had a history of severe depression, and I was really just sort of muscling through that because I also had two young daughters and they needed me. So not only was I struggling with my own demons of having a very difficult and traumatic childhood, but when I found out about Charlie, I then had to deal with the actual trauma and paradigm shift of all of a sudden someone in my midst is a murderer. And all of those things that came up were, I had a monster in my childhood. So for me to have befriended a monster, I started to really question myself. Like, do I actually have any interior instincts? Do I actually have instincts? And it took a long time, a lot of therapy, a lot of working with different modalities to get me to a place now where I can look back and say, okay, I give myself a lot of props for not just falling apart. I didn't. I kept it together. I showed up. I showed up for the detectives, even though I was extremely sick. I had a really like a deadly heart condition, and I had to keep that job. So not only was I dealing with the stress of Charlie, but I was also dealing with the stress of I might die and leave my children. So it was a really, really rough time in my life. And I made it through. And that muscling through is what I hope no one has to go through. Also, when I look back, is the fact that my institution, the people that I worked with, no one asked me if I was okay. Everyone knew that I was Charlie's best friend. They did not know that I was working undercover, but they knew that he was arrested, and not one person asked me if I was okay.
I have a question about that, going back to some of the things that you said, and I know we'll most likely touch on that later, but you
Mhm.
mentioned um, this dynamic of you holding guilt, right? But when I was thinking about it, when you're in a profession like this, and even as a therapist, there's ethical and moral code that individuals you're working with are going to be putting their best effort and faith in humanity. And so it makes me wonder, and we'll talk about this later, but about the institutions, academia, and individuals coming into this field,
Mhm.
passing coursework, getting through system after system after system, and not getting flagged earlier in the system, right?
Mhm.
Systems just
Mhm.
turning away, and I'm always curious about that, and I wanna talk about the healthcare system in relation to Charlie and how he got this far, and now you're holding this guilt
Mhm.
when it's like a projection of the system onto you.
Mhm.
And maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but going back to your friendship with Charlie, do you ever wonder if people were intimidated or fearful of you knowing that he had this reputation and you 2 were friends?
I think that was definitely part of it, and I remained at the hospital after he was arrested. I had to because I needed the insurance,
Yeah.
but I also understand why people were distancing themselves from me, because I have so much empathy for them. And looking back, I know that I would have been strong enough to talk to someone if it had been in reverse, but that's just my personality. It's just who I am. And I'm not afraid to jump into those situations. Charlie, on the other hand, made it all the way through with almost all of these hospitals knowing that he had some kind of a psychiatric history. He was actually admitted to a psychiatric unit, um, for a suicide attempt and for stalking. And his supervisor called him on the unit and asked him when he was coming back to work.
Wow.
Yeah. So the care that nurses, healthcare workers receive when it comes to mental health is almost nothing. And back then it was less than nothing. And they just wanted their numbers. They wanted a warm body. And especially it's night shift, it's ICU. Critical care is very hard to staff. And so they ignored all of his warning signs.
Did he, uh, meet your daughters?
He did not. And in the movie, I wrestled with that when the first reading came up of the script. and I was able to talk to the writer herself, Christy Wilson Cairns. She's brilliant, and we worked really very closely together. And as a script writer, what she was trying to do was bring the audience in to show them just how close we were.
Mm.
I was actually a trauma nurse. I lived 3.5 hours away from that hospital. So I lived in upstate New York and I traveled down to New Jersey and I stayed in the hospital for the entire weekend. She wanted to use that as a way to help people understand that when you're in those situations, you become so close and so intertwined. And originally, I said, I do not want that in the script. I don't want people thinking that I would have introduced him to my daughters. And then I thought about it, and it works in the movie. I understand now why she did it. I most likely would have introduced him to my daughters. I most likely would have been seeking some type of social interaction with him outside of the hospital if I had lived closer to the hospital.
Yeah, so you must have seen some part of him that was humanizing in the sense of what I'm this is gonna sound controversial, but I'm an IFS, internal family systems therapist, and so even in looking at serial killers, there was a part of him that you saw that was must have been caring and drew you into some capacity, whether this was his front or not, there was something there for you that you saw some level of kindness in him.
I have looked at this for the past 20 years, more than 20 years now. And I have no idea whether Charlie was the murderer and that was who he actually was, and the friend that he put forward was his mask,
Mm.
or if I was able to bring something out in him because of my gentleness, because of my friendship, because I put him under my wing, I don't know if I brought that loving nature out in him. He was a single parent with two daughters like me. And so we definitely had something in common. He talked a lot about his toxic relationship with his then girlfriend, so we bonded in ways that were also a little bit dark. I also believe I was drawn to his brokenness and his darkness because I had the same darkness in me. My brokenness went in the opposite direction. I became overtly caring. I became an extreme advocate for my patients to the point of many times putting my own profession, my own license at risk because I was loud and very much a person that would go to bat for my patients against anyone. And he was more in the background and very brilliant, and back then, we couldn't look medications up on a computer. We had to flip through a book. So it was very nice having someone like him who was so brilliant and knew medications so well that we could just yell across the nurse's station, "Hey, Charlie, what about this medication for this code?" So, yeah, I definitely saw something in him. I have no idea whether that was the mask or not. And I do believe he had some type of dissociative disorder. He's never spoken to the psychiatric community to be evaluated. He was supposed to have an evaluation when he was going to be going to trial, but there was no trial. He admitted to everything and he volunteered all of the information to the investigation. And, we'll never know.
Are you still in touch with him?
I was until the book came out in 2013. Charlie did not know that I was a confidential informant. And when that book came out, he learned that I was a confidential informant.
Did he reach out to you about that or have anything to say?
No, we had done the 60 Minutes interview right before the book came out. It was right around the same time. And when he was interviewed by 60 Minutes, they were not very nice to him. And they really brought it forward about me essentially not being his friend and that I was the one that put him behind bars.
I could only imagine, like, or I can't actually, but having that dynamic of like a friendship and then having to report them, it's so conflictual and confusing.
It was. It was. And I struggled with that. The night he was giving the full confession. I was there during that confession. I could not be in the room with him, but I was right outside the door. So he would come out for breaks and I would be there. There are a few videos out there and in the documentary Capturing the Killer Nurse, you can see him sitting in this chair surrounded by the detectives and he has my sweater on. So during that time, I could only see him as the child that he once was. And that in itself made me feel, again, just that guilt of I still care for this person. And he is literally a monster. He murdered so many people. And I I also think it's very challenging for people to see him as a true serial killer because he's not the Ted Bundy that strangles. He's not the BTK killer who tortures. However, the medications that he used, for instance, vecuronium is a paralytic, and he often used that medication to paralyze these people. And there are speculations that he would watch them die as and also medications that he would use that were torturous, like the vecuronium. There were others that can cause a lot of pain. If he wanted to be a mercy killer and he truly wanted to put people out of their misery, he would have used something like Diprovan and overdosed someone with Valium or something that was not torturous. And I think because these were clean kills, people have whitewashed his victims so much that they just, they called him the angel of death. And he was never a mercy killer. He enjoyed it.
So I'm hearing it was maybe he would paralyze someone and then give them a medication that was extremely painful and watch them die.
And that's a speculation. That is a speculation. He did not say that. However, the medications that he used, it is probable that's what happened.
I'm curious, in moving forward around working with him, what was there anything at stake for you when detectives came in and said, "Hey, this is what we're speculating. We want to put a wire on you and try to get his confession." What was that like for you?
One of the biggest challenges was that I had just recently had a pacemaker put in. And while I was being wired up, I was just in a tank top. And the tech who was wiring me up saw this scar and he said, "What is that?" Because one of the leads was supposed to stick right there. And I said, "It's a pacemaker." And he said, "Nope, we're done. We're not doing this. And we have no idea how this would actually affect your pacemaker." And the detective said, "Nope, we're not doing this." And I said, "Absolutely, I'm doing this. I'm a cardiac nurse. It's fine. I didn't know whether it was fine or not, but I knew I was going in and I was going to get this done.
Well,
I
you were
think
closest
looking
to him too at the time, right? Yeah.
and when the detectives first showed up in the hospital, they were asking a lot of questions about me. So I was never told that I could have an attorney present. I was never told that the hospital attorneys could be available for me. I was coached really on what I could say, but it was not something that people were really not talking at that time about rights that we could have, and I probably should not have been talking to the detectives.
Where I kind of want to lead into like the systems and the healthcare component out of
Yeah.
that, because one thing about your story is it wasn't just about one person, there's also this system involved. Yeah, it made me wonder, detectives came in and talked to you, but what was the setup? How was the system involved in this? Or what did the healthcare system miss? Right? And why weren't you told what your rights were? I mean, you don't have
I
to answer, but I'm just curious what that all was like for you in retrospect and thinking back.
Thinking back, I believe they were hoping I would take the detectives off the trail because I was so angry toward the detectives and I was angry with the hospital. I think they were really just hoping that I would implicate myself and that everything would be over. But that didn't happen. That did not happen.
How do you think he got through so many different hospitals? They would just, I mean,
Money. It's capitalism. Because they knew they over and over and over again, the detectives looked back and saw there was evidence, and he was let go because of suspicious activity on his part. And several of those hospitals knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had been murdering people. And those hospitals, those people were never held accountable. And in fact, the woman who was supposed to be really helping the detectives with their investigation, she was sidelining everything that they were doing. She was the risk manager and she was promoted to vice president. So it's all money. All of it was money. Every single bit of it was money.
mhm, mhm, absolutely. I'm curious, what are your thoughts now in the work that you're doing, and how are you advocating for nurses and the healthcare system? Tell me what you're up to now.
Right now, the most exciting thing that is happening, I finally submitted my manuscript to my agent. I've been working on it, and this is not an account of just me and Charlie. This is about my brokenness as a child and how my mental health was so poor that it was understandable. I was drawn into healthcare because it draws a lot of broken people. And the healthcare system itself mirrors my own brokenness. And I believe there is hope through my own healing and the way that I have healed myself. I believe that the healthcare system, there is hope in fixing the healthcare system. It's never going to look the way that we want it to look. I do think that with this book, it can open up an even larger conversation and bringing in therapists to truly have therapy as part of our debriefings. We are not doing debriefings, and debriefings are something that it's proven over and over and over again that this helps nurses. And I think having a healthcare professional on staff for each floor, not just an EAP situation, but to truly have therapists on hand so that we can work through things in real time, because we are bringing things from the home and we are bringing our brokenness into the into healthcare, and there is no true assistance for our mental health, as and especially after COVID, so many of us suffered dramatically with our mental health.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And that PTSD, we're still carrying and bringing it to our patients. We are.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's the deep psychological impact of the trauma that you see as
Mhm,
nurses and what you go through and not having time to debrief that all of the time.
mhm, mhm. And we should have time. We should be given that time. And it is right now the mental health, the horrible mental health of our healthcare workers. It certainly is something you're seeing on TikTok. You're seeing it on Instagram. You're seeing that people are talking about it openly, but there's no real solutions to this. I think there's some really, really great uh, peer led programs. I just think that it is without actually taking care of ourselves. And that's a hard thing to talk about, especially with nurses, because they feel very much like the hospitals and the institutions they work for are the ones who damage them, and they should be responsible for healing them. And so when I start to talk about healing ourselves, there is a lot of pushback.
Mhm.
And what I have realized is it has to be both. It has to be balanced. And this is not about the blame game of you are responsible for what the institution did to you. However, we are responsible for making ourselves healthy,
Yeah.
and if we're not being offered that by the institution, it is our responsibility to do it for ourselves. And there's so many ways to do that. It's not just through talk therapy. There's so many modalities out there to help. The modality that I have used is hypnosis
Okay.
and timeline regression. I have used Reiki, and I have used sound bath healings. There's so many things that are not just about self care, because I think that's a buzzword that was so overused. This is not about self care. This is not about going home and taking a damn bubble bath.
Yeah.
This is really about going deep into what led me to healthcare,
Mhm.
and now how am I going to show up for myself and my patients and my family and lessen the damage of what is happening on the floors?
I wonder, I mean, I don't know anything about nurse curriculum or teachings, but do you think that in the future or hope for in the future that there'll be more or they'll integrate levels of self introspection into nursing curriculum?
That is my hope.
Yeah.
I want that to be a part of what we learn is about how to take care of our own mental health
Yeah.
and how to recognize that someone else in your perimeter
Mm.
is struggling, and not just struggling because they have a bad marriage or because they're depressed,
Right.
but Charlie was struggling. Charlie was really struggling, and I did not have the tools to recognize that because I was so deeply depressed, and I was just muscling my way through.
Oh.
And if someone had noticed his true psychiatric problems very early on and gotten the help that he deserved, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. And we need to be offering that, yes, to students, because There's a lot of research out there that nursing students specifically are sustaining moral injury at a much higher rate than the nurses that have been in this for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I could see that. Moral injury for sure. I can see that. Do you think it's because of training or yeah, I mean, what do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
I can look back at my own training, and there was this story I have of this. I was on the psychiatric ward as a nursing student, and this very cachectic older woman, just what she was so suicidal, and my instructor had brought a pencil in with her to this unit where you are not allowed to have pencils, pens, anything. It was, it was just
Why
paper
is it
plates. And she brought a pencil in, and that patient lunged across the table, grabbed the pencil, and stabbed it into her hand. And I lunged across. I was right across from her, grabbed her. My instructor is just screaming. My instructor. I am a student, a young student who is trying to get this pencil away from her so that she doesn't damage organs. And I remember after that, the most important thing for me was to know how to document that so that my instructor was not held accountable.
Wow.
There was no debriefing. There was, let's talk about how we're going to document this. So I learned that moral injury, and it was over and over and over again. I have hundreds of those stories. Instructors not being present with your mental health. No one asked me, and this was back in the 80s, no one asked me, how are you feeling about that? How did that affect you? And even 40 years later, it's still affecting me. So it was, I know it's still happening. They're not receiving debriefings. They're not receiving the mental health care that they deserve. They're not.
Do you f do you feel that it could come down to money? Why else wouldn't they put a therapist?
No, I think we understand the research. I think that there are amazing educators out there. They are so focused on the syllabus and passing the NCLEX, at least in nursing. I don't know about other. The schools need to keep up their percentage rates of how many nurses pass the NCLEX. And so I think putting something in there, something more into what their curriculum is saying they need to pass the NCLEX, that's just not one of them. Taking care of your mental health is not one of the important things. And how do we change that? It's by having these conversations that I appreciate so much.
I'm wondering what would be any advice, tips, or tools to give to anyone listening who is a nurse and may have suspicion of something happening in their unit, or what might be something you would say to any of those who may be ignoring any kind of intuition that doesn't feel right?
Talk about it, talk about it, talk about it, talk about it. Talk about it and document that you've talked about it with your manager. Document that you've talked about it with your supervisor. Document that you've talked about it with HR. HR is not your friend. Risk management is not your friend. They are there to protect the hospital, and you need to document over and over and over again. And also the empathy of when you see someone breaking down. We have a lot of bullying in nursing, a lot of bullying. When we see someone breaking down, we tend to pull back. What I'm saying is move forward, move toward this, move toward them, and ask them, "Are you okay?" Over and over and over again. And it is the only way that we are going to be able to heal this profession is by embracing the fact that we're not okay. And the only way forward right now is through.
What do you hope people take away from your story?
My story is a challenging one because the book itself is very much about a serial killer. And Charles Graeber is a brilliant investigative reporter, and he did a brilliant job in putting forward the fact that the hospitals are really the ones who are responsible for what happened with Charlie and not turning it in and blocking investigations. My story itself that Hollywood portrayed shows me as much more weak than I actually was. That Hollywood portrayal was about me pushing back against the detectives, and I never did that. I never once pushed back against those detectives. I jumped in feet first the second I knew that someone was harming my patients. It didn't matter if it was my friend, it wouldn't have mattered if it was a loved one. I jumped in feet first. And I want people to understand that was Hollywood.
Right.
And we are much stronger than we give each other credit. We are 4+ million strong in the nursing profession. We can do this together. We can find a way out of this. And hopefully, once my book is published, we'll be able to have even bigger conversations about this.
Absolutely. What are you offering now for our listeners? How can they find you? What if they want to work with you or learn more about you? Tell us.
I am working one on one with people less and less. And there's a reason for that. It's because I I feel like over Zoom it's for me it's just not as effective, but there are so many people out there and I will send you along to those people who I feel are really really good at the Zoom process. But you can look me up on amythegoodnurse.com and you can find me on Instagram. Am I do post a lot of political things
I like it. Yeah.
and I do post a lot about nursing. There's so many nurse creators out there that are doing such a wonderful job. So hopefully my page is going to be turning more toward promoting the book and having these bigger conversations about mental health. So you'll see a change here shortly.
Wonderful. Yeah, I definitely am gonna be looking out for when that book is published, and we'll be reading it and get some copies for my clinicians. I just appreciate your time and your responsiveness to this interview and talking more about how we support our communities, especially in the wellness and healthcare industry, and how systems do play a tremendous role in what's happening, good and bad, out there in the world.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Mhm. And thank you for the work that you do because being a therapist in this climate, there's so much trauma, just so much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.